It was a calm morning, with the sun just starting to rise over the quiet streets of the suburban neighborhood. The FBI director, a man known for his composed demeanor and decades of experience in law enforcement, was driving his car to an early morning meeting. He had been up since before dawn, reviewing case files and preparing for a busy day ahead. The roads were nearly empty, a few early commuters making their way to work, and the air was fresh and crisp. There was a sense of normalcy in the routine, something the director had come to value amidst the chaos that often defined his professional life. As he drove along a stretch of road lined with trees, he noticed a police car behind him. At first, it seemed like any ordinary car on patrol, but then the lights flashed and he realized he was being signaled to pull over. He followed protocol, safely steering his vehicle to the side of the road and turning off the engine. His hands rested on the wheel, calm and visible, as he prepared to speak with the officer. The officer approached quickly, and almost immediately, the situation became tense. The man had his gun drawn, pointing it directly at the director. He shouted orders, demanding that the director keep his hands where they could be seen and slowly step out of the car. The director, though surprised, maintained a steady tone, speaking clearly and calmly. He identified himself as the FBI director, explaining his credentials and purpose. But the officer, visibly nervous, seemed unsure, not lowering the weapon or stepping back. Time seemed to stretch as the standoff continued. Pedestrians walking nearby stopped in their tracks, staring in disbelief. Some cars slowed, drivers craning their necks to see what was happening. The scene felt surreal, almost like a story unfolding in slow motion. The director knew that any sudden movement could escalate the situation, so he remained still, hands raised slightly, speaking softly to reassure the officer. The officer's voice wavered. He asked for identification, not seeming to fully grasp the weight of the man in front of him. The director, experienced in high-stakes encounters, understood the fear that might be influencing the officer's actions. He slowly reached for his credentials, explaining each step, making sure not to make any sudden gestures. The tension in the air was thick and every passerby could feel it, though none could intervene. It was a delicate moment where professionalism and human instinct collided. Meanwhile, inside his mind, the director reflected on his career. He had faced dangerous criminals, diffused volatile situations, and navigated the complexities of law enforcement with patience and skill. Yet here he was, a high-ranking official, caught in a scenario where training and rank seemed irrelevant. The irony was not lost on him, but he kept his focus on de-escalating the encounter, aware that lives, including his own, could be at risk if emotions took over. The officer, still holding the gun, began to speak more rapidly, asking questions in a jittery, almost panicked manner. He wanted to know why the director didn't immediately produce his badge and identification in a specific format. The director explained calmly, emphasizing that he was cooperating fully, and slowly presented his official credentials. It was a meticulous process, each movement deliberate to avoid misunderstanding. Yet the officer's anxiety seemed to grow with every second. Witnesses on the sidewalk whispered to each other, some recording the incident on their phones. The director noticed the small crowd, but he did not let it distract him. His focus remained on the officer, maintaining eye contact and speaking in measured tones. He knew that panic could escalate the situation beyond control. He also knew that showing fear would only heighten the tension. In moments like these, composure was as critical as authority. The officer's breathing became audible, quick and uneven. He glanced back toward his patrol car, possibly seeking reassurance from a radio or thinking about backup. The director continued to speak, offering reassurances, acknowledging the officer's duty, and emphasizing that he was not a threat. It was a delicate dance, a balance between asserting identity and respecting the other man's position and fears. As the minutes passed, the director's thoughts drifted to his family, colleagues, and the many lives affected by decisions made in high-pressure moments. He remembered his early days on the force, learning to navigate difficult encounters and the lessons taught by mentors who emphasized patience and clarity. He drew on those lessons now, using them to guide every word and gesture. The goal was simple: survive the encounter without anyone being harmed. The tension was almost tangible. Pedestrians held their breath, drivers craned their necks, and the officer's hand shook slightly on the weapon. It was a stark reminder of how fragile human interactions could be under stress. A misstep, a raised voice, or a sudden movement could have dire consequences. The director, however, remained an anchor of calm amidst the chaos. After what felt like an eternity, a second officer arrived at the scene. This arrival subtly shifted the dynamics. The first officer looked briefly relieved, lowering the weapon slightly but still cautious. The director continued to speak, this time addressing both officers, calmly explaining his position and credentials. The arrival of backup began to de-escalate the immediate threat, though the situation was far from resolved. Throughout this ordeal, the director's mind worked methodically. He assessed the officer's body language, the crowd's reactions, and the surrounding environment. Each factor influenced how he spoke and moved. He avoided any sudden gestures, maintained a clear voice, and ensured that every instruction he gave was precise. It was a high-stakes scenario, and experience guided his actions as much as instinct. The neighborhood itself seemed to hold its breath. Windows were opened cautiously as residents peeked outside, trying to understand the commotion. The flashing lights of the patrol cars reflected off parked vehicles, casting moving shadows across the quiet street. Children in nearby homes watched from behind curtains, sensing the seriousness of the situation, even if they could not comprehend all the details. Inside his car, the director reflected on the fragility of authority. Rank, experience, and position could be momentarily meaningless in the face of fear and misunderstanding. Yet he also recognized the humanity of the officer in front of him. Fear was a natural response, and mistakes were a part of life. His task was not to judge, but to navigate the moment with clarity, compassion, and composure. As he spoke, the director maintained a calm rhythm, never raising his voice, never showing irritation or fear. He described his duties, his purpose for being in the area, and his full cooperation with law enforcement procedures. He emphasized that he had no intention of resisting or causing conflict. It was a delicate balance between asserting his identity and reassuring the officer of his good intentions. The officer finally took a small step back, a subtle acknowledgement of the director's words. The tension did not vanish completely, but the immediate threat began to diminish. The director could sense the shift and continued to provide clear, steady instructions, ensuring that communication remained open and effective. Every moment felt critical, yet the director managed to maintain a sense of calm that contrasted sharply with the nervous energy of the officer. It was a testament to his training, experience, and ability to stay grounded under pressure. The director's approach was not confrontational. It was measured, empathetic, and deliberate, aimed at bringing reason and safety to a volatile situation. As the first part of the ordeal drew to a close, the director realized that patience and clarity were his greatest tools. The standoff had lasted long enough to capture the attention of neighbors and passers-by, creating a scene that would be remembered for its unusual nature. The director remained seated in his car, hands visible, eyes calm, as the officers began to verify his credentials and assess the situation more thoroughly. The sun continued to rise, casting light on the street and reflecting off the patrol cars' flashing lights. The neighborhood was awake now, buzzing with quiet conversations about the strange and tense encounter. Yet the director remained focused, aware that the next few moments would determine how safely the situation could be resolved. He drew on every ounce of his experience, every lesson from a long career in law enforcement, to navigate the delicate balance of authority, communication, and human emotion. The first part of the encounter ended with the situation stabilizing slightly, but the uncertainty remained. The director had managed to maintain composure, protect himself, and begin the process of clarifying the misunderstanding. The officer, though still cautious, was beginning to recognize the identity and authority of the man in front of him. The neighborhood, while tense, was beginning to understand that the immediate danger had lessened. It was a moment that captured the unpredictability of life, the fragility of human perception, and the importance of calm, reasoned action. The FBI director, a figure accustomed to controlling situations and managing crises, had been placed in a scenario where patience, clarity, and human understanding were the most critical tools at his disposal. The events of that morning would leave a lasting impression on all involved, illustrating both the dangers of miscommunication and the power of composed, human-centered action in the face of fear and uncertainty. The tension on the quiet suburban street did not disappear immediately. Even after the arrival of the second officer, the situation remained delicate. The FBI director, sitting calmly in his car, could see the unease in the officer's eyes. Their body language was stiff, movements cautious, and voices still slightly shaky. The director, aware of the gravity of the moment, decided to remain patient, understanding that rushing the situation could make things worse. As the second officer began speaking to his colleague, asking for clarification and trying to confirm the identity of the man in the car, the director remained composed. He knew that any sudden action could trigger a response he did not want to see. He slowly reached for his credentials again, placing them on the dashboard where both officers could see clearly. He explained each step he was taking, making sure his hands were visible at all times. It was a careful dance of communication, a delicate balance of asserting authority without escalating fear. Pedestrians had gathered quietly along the sidewalks, some whispering, others silently recording the events. Drivers slowed, craning their necks to get a glimpse of what was unfolding. The atmosphere was heavy, almost cinematic, with the flashing patrol lights reflecting off the car windows and the tree-lined street around them. For many, it was hard to believe that such a high-ranking law enforcement official could be treated with such suspicion and aggression. The officer who had initially drawn his weapon still seemed tense, though he had lowered it slightly. His hands trembled as he adjusted his grip, and his eyes darted nervously between the director and his colleague. The director continued to speak calmly, explaining that he was cooperating fully, emphasizing that he had no intention of resisting or causing conflict. Every word was deliberate, every gesture measured, as he worked to de-escalate a situation that could have easily spiraled out of control. Inside his mind, the director reflected on the unpredictable nature of human behavior. He had faced criminals who were aggressive and calculating, yet here he was confronted by a well-meaning officer who was acting out of fear and misunderstanding. It was a stark reminder that authority and experience could be momentarily irrelevant when fear and miscommunication were involved. He focused on patience, empathy, and clear communication as the tools to navigate this encounter safely. The second officer, now fully present at the scene, began to ask the director questions in a calmer tone. He verified credentials, checked identification, and slowly started to piece together the situation. The first officer, still visibly shaken, listened intently, his posture gradually relaxing. The presence of another officer who could act as a stabilizing influence made a significant difference in how the situation unfolded. The director maintained eye contact, speaking softly and reassuringly. He acknowledged the fears of the first officer, recognizing that anyone in law enforcement could feel a surge of adrenaline in such a high-stakes scenario. He expressed understanding, not anger, showing that professionalism did not require domination but careful management of emotions and perception. It was a subtle but powerful approach, rooted in experience and empathy. Around them, the neighborhood had become a quiet spectator zone. Windows were open, and residents peered out from behind curtains. Children, sensing the seriousness of the situation, stayed close to their parents, watching silently. The street was alive with tension and curiosity, but no one intervened, respecting the unfolding law enforcement interaction. Every person present understood, even in some small measure, that this was not an ordinary traffic stop. The director continued to guide the interaction, answering questions carefully and explaining the purpose of his presence in the area. He highlighted his willingness to cooperate fully, his hands always visible and his tone steady. It was a masterclass in crisis management, as he balanced authority with empathy, showing that the human element in law enforcement could make all the difference. The officer who had initially drawn his weapon began to relax further, though caution remained. He asked for clarification on certain points, still processing the surreal nature of the situation. The director, understanding the need to maintain trust and calm, responded without impatience, explaining each detail slowly and clearly. He avoided any language that could be interpreted as confrontational, focusing instead on clarity and reassurance. As the minutes passed, the director noticed subtle shifts in the crowd. Some pedestrians lowered their phones, others whispered quietly, and the tension in the street eased just slightly. The officer's body language indicated growing confidence in their understanding of the situation. The director had created a space where fear could be managed, communication could flow, and the potential for harm was minimized. In his reflections, the director thought about the unpredictability of law enforcement interactions. He recalled training exercises, past crises, and negotiations where patience and empathy had saved lives. He drew on these experiences now, applying every lesson in real time. He understood that authority alone was not enough. Clarity, composure, and humanity were equally critical in moments like this. The first officer, now visibly calmer, lowered his weapon completely. He continued to speak quietly, confirming details with his colleague and taking instructions from the backup officer. The director remained seated, hands clearly visible, maintaining eye contact and a calm tone. The situation had moved from immediate danger to careful resolution, but vigilance was still necessary. Every step needed attention, every word carefully considered. The director could see the impact of his approach on the officers. They were beginning to listen, understand, and respond appropriately. It was a moment of subtle transformation, where fear was replaced by clarity and misunderstanding was replaced by awareness. The director's experience and human-centered approach had turned what could have been a dangerous encounter into a controlled interaction, emphasizing the importance of patience, empathy, and professionalism. Meanwhile, the second officer continued to manage communication, ensuring that the first officer remained focused and calm. Together, the officers and the director navigated the complexities of identity verification, protocol, and human emotion. The process was meticulous, slow, and deliberate, demonstrating the importance of measured action in law enforcement. The director reflected on the lessons inherent in the encounter. He thought about the human element in policing, the role of fear and perception, and the need for clear communication. He considered how easily a misunderstanding could escalate into violence, and how crucial it was for all parties to remain composed. His thoughts were not theoretical. They were practical, grounded in decades of experience and real-world encounters. Pedestrians continued to observe, now more relaxed as the officers worked through the verification process. Conversations were low, whispers of disbelief and curiosity filling the quiet street. The director, aware of the presence of bystanders, maintained a calm demeanor, ensuring that no sudden action could startle anyone or create additional tension. The interaction stretched on, but gradually a resolution began to take shape. The director had provided clear, verified credentials, answered every question with patience, and demonstrated full cooperation. The officers were now able to recognize the situation accurately, their fear slowly transforming into professional understanding. The immediate threat had passed, but the memory of the standoff would linger for everyone present. In the midst of this, the director continued to model calm, respectful communication. He understood that the first officer's actions, though mistaken, were driven by fear and uncertainty. There was no anger, only a focus on resolution and safety. His approach emphasized that professionalism could coexist with empathy, and that human understanding was as vital as procedure. As the standoff came closer to a controlled resolution, the director thought about the broader implications of such encounters. He considered the importance of training, communication, and human-centered policing. He recognized that every officer could find themselves in similar situations, where fear and misjudgment could lead to danger. His experience highlighted the necessity of patience, clarity, and a calm presence in maintaining safety for all involved. Finally, the officers began to relax fully, acknowledging the director's identity and allowing the situation to settle. The street, once tense with fear and uncertainty, returned to a quieter, more normal rhythm. Pedestrians resumed their morning routines, drivers continued along the road, and the immediate tension dissipated. Yet the events left an indelible impression on everyone present, illustrating the fragility of human perception and the power of composure under pressure. The director, now fully recognized and verified, remained a model of calm and professionalism. He had navigated a potentially dangerous scenario with skill, patience, and empathy, demonstrating the value of human-centered action in law enforcement. The experience would serve as a reminder of the importance of communication, understanding, and restraint in every interaction, no matter how routine it might seem. Even after the immediate tension had eased, the morning was far from over. The FBI director remained on the roadside, fully cooperating as the officers began to process the situation more thoroughly. It was clear that something unusual had occurred, and the officers needed to reconcile the reality in front of them with their initial assumptions. The director, patient and composed, knew that clarity and calm would guide the resolution. The first officer, who had initially drawn his weapon, was still shaken. His hands trembled slightly and his voice was cautious as he spoke with his colleague. The director understood that fear could linger even after the facts were clear, and he continued to speak in a calm, reassuring tone. He explained the steps of his journey, the purpose of his travel, and how he had followed all proper procedures. Every word was carefully chosen, intended to calm nerves and provide certainty. Backup officers communicated via radio, verifying the director's credentials and relaying information to their command center. Slowly, the tension began to shift from uncertainty to recognition. The first officer's posture relaxed, though vigilance remained as the reality of the situation became undeniable. The director kept his hands visible and his tone even, a steady anchor in a scenario that had started with fear and misunderstanding. While the officers worked to process the facts, bystanders continued to watch. Some whispered to each other, discussing the extraordinary nature of the events. Others recorded quietly, their phones capturing every detail of the standoff. The director noticed their presence but remained focused on the officers. His priority was safety and clarity, and he managed the scene with an awareness that every action had consequences, not just for him but for everyone observing. The conversation between the officers and the director shifted toward specifics. They asked questions about his travel, his identification, and the nature of his official duties. The director answered patiently, explaining clearly without ever raising his voice. He maintained an understanding tone, recognizing that the first officer's actions had been driven by a mix of nervousness and misjudgment. There was no anger, only a careful, human-centered approach to ensure that everyone could move forward safely. As time passed, the situation attracted the attention of nearby residents. Windows opened and people cautiously stepped outside to see what had unfolded. The flashing patrol lights illuminated the street, casting moving reflections across the pavement and parked cars. Children, sensing tension, stayed close to parents, while adults exchanged quiet conversations about the unusual scene. The director remained calm, understanding that his demeanor could influence both the officers and the onlookers. Inside his mind, he reflected on the nature of law enforcement interactions. Misunderstandings could arise from simple errors or assumptions, and high-stress situations often magnified fear. He had spent decades navigating tense encounters, and now he applied those lessons, emphasizing patience, clear communication, and empathy. Every response was deliberate, aimed at reducing fear and increasing understanding. The first officer began to speak more coherently, asking follow-up questions as he processed the director's explanations. It was clear that the immediate danger had passed, but the officers still needed to reconcile their initial actions with the reality of the man before them. The director provided detailed answers, maintaining composure and showing professionalism. He ensured that every movement and gesture reinforced his peaceful intentions, helping to rebuild trust and restore order. Backup officers continued their verification, checking identification and confirming official status. Their presence helped stabilize the first officer, giving him reassurance that the situation was under control. The director observed carefully, noting the importance of communication, hierarchy, and teamwork in diffusing misunderstandings. He understood that the resolution would require patience and careful attention to human reactions as much as procedural accuracy. During this time, the director reflected on the unpredictability of encounters in law enforcement. Even those with authority and experience could become vulnerable under certain conditions. He thought about training exercises, past high-pressure scenarios, and lessons from mentors who had emphasized the importance of patience, clarity, and composure. Those lessons were now being tested in a real, unpredictable environment. The officers gradually shifted from caution to recognition, their voices calm and controlled. They discussed the situation among themselves, comparing facts and verifying details. The director answered each inquiry with steady clarity, never allowing frustration or impatience to emerge. His approach emphasized human understanding, reinforcing the idea that even in tense situations, empathy and professionalism could guide resolution. As the minutes passed, the neighborhood began to settle. Pedestrians moved back, some still whispering, others quietly observing. The flashing lights of the patrol cars, once a symbol of immediate tension, now reflected a more controlled environment. The director remained composed, a steady presence as the officers worked to finalize verification and begin procedural follow-up. The first officer, now fully aware of the reality, expressed a mixture of relief and embarrassment. He realized the magnitude of his mistake and the potential danger it had created. The director, ever professional, acknowledged the fear, but focused on ensuring the situation ended safely. There was no confrontation, only a calm emphasis on understanding, responsibility, and communication. The director could see the shift in attitude among the officers. Their nervous energy had begun to transform into professional awareness. The initial fear was replaced by understanding and accountability. The director had guided the interaction from confusion and danger toward resolution, demonstrating the power of patience, clarity, and empathy in managing high-stakes encounters. In his reflections, the director thought about the lessons of the morning. Miscommunication and fear could easily escalate situations, even when both parties had the best intentions. Yet, careful, deliberate communication could de-escalate tension and restore safety. He considered how these insights could inform future training and policy, emphasizing the importance of human-centered approaches alongside procedural rules. The officers began to engage in more structured dialogue, discussing what had happened and how it could have been handled differently. The director responded thoughtfully, providing insights without criticism, emphasizing shared responsibility and the need for awareness in all law enforcement interactions. It was a conversation rooted in professionalism and human understanding, guiding everyone involved toward reflection and growth. Meanwhile, the streets slowly returned to normal. Cars resumed their routes, pedestrians continued with their morning routines, and the neighborhood began to absorb the unusual event into memory. The director remained a steady figure, calmly waiting as the officers completed their verification and procedural follow-up. His presence and demeanor had helped prevent escalation and maintain safety in a scenario that could easily have gone wrong. The interaction continued to underscore the importance of communication and human awareness in law enforcement. Fear, misunderstanding, and misjudgment could create dangerous situations, but clear, patient, and empathetic action could resolve them. The director's example demonstrated that even high-ranking officials were subject to human error. Yet professionalism and human-centered thinking could guide safe resolution. As the morning progressed, the officers finalized their verification, confirming the director's identity and status. The tension that had dominated the street slowly dissipated, replaced by a cautious relief. The director, maintaining his calm presence, ensured that the first officer understood the implications of the encounter and the importance of reflection and learning from mistakes. There was no anger, only clarity, accountability, and guidance. The director thought about the broader impact of the event. It was a reminder that law enforcement was a human endeavor, where emotions, assumptions, and fear could shape outcomes. Professionalism, patience, and empathy were as critical as authority and procedure. He had navigated the encounter successfully, demonstrating the power of human-centered action in a high-stakes, unpredictable scenario. Finally, the officers acknowledged the director's cooperation and professionalism. The street, once filled with tension and fear, returned to a quieter rhythm. The bystanders, having witnessed an extraordinary interaction, began to move along, their whispers fading. The director remained seated, reflecting on the experience and the lessons it offered about communication, human behavior, and the importance of maintaining composure in every situation. In the end, Part 3 of the encounter highlighted the slow but steady process of de-escalation, the power of empathy and clarity, and the human element that shapes every interaction. The FBI director had maintained professionalism and calm under pressure, guiding the officers and the situation toward understanding and resolution. It was a story of patience, reflection, and the subtle yet powerful influence of human-centered decision-making in law enforcement. With the immediate tension of the roadside encounter beginning to fade, The FBI director finally stepped out of his car under the watchful eyes of the officers. The first officer, still visibly shaken, lowered his weapon completely and began to communicate more clearly with his colleagues. The director maintained a calm demeanor, aware that the next phase required careful attention. It was no longer a standoff but a process of resolution and understanding. His experience and training allowed him to navigate this delicate moment with poise and professionalism. As the director presented his credentials again, both officers examined them closely, verifying each detail. Radios crackled with communication to dispatch, confirming information and updating the chain of command. The director patiently explained each step, answering questions calmly and thoroughly. He understood that despite his high rank, the officers needed reassurance and clarity to fully process the situation. The interaction required patience, empathy, and clarity, qualities that had guided him throughout his career. The atmosphere on the street began to shift. Residents who had been observing quietly from their homes or sidewalks now whispered softly to each other, expressing relief and fascination. Cars slowly resumed their routes, though some drivers slowed to observe the unusual scene. The director, focused on the officers and the situation at hand, ignored the background activity. His priority remained ensuring that everyone involved was safe and that the situation was fully understood and documented. The first officer, still processing what had happened, began to explain his actions. His voice was low and cautious, tinged with embarrassment and anxiety. The director listened attentively, maintaining a tone of calm authority while recognizing the human fear that had driven the officer's response. He did not chastise or criticize. Instead, he acknowledged the fear, emphasizing that understanding and learning from mistakes were crucial aspects of law enforcement. Backup officers, who had been verifying credentials and overseeing the situation, spoke with their colleagues to coordinate next steps. The director contributed to the discussion with clear, concise information, helping the officers understand the broader context of his presence in the area. He shared insights about his duties and responsibilities, demonstrating that transparency and cooperation were key to resolving high-stakes situations safely. As the conversation unfolded, the first officer began to visibly relax. His movements became less rigid and his breathing slowed. The embarrassment he felt gave way to a cautious understanding of what had occurred. The director continued to model calm and professional behavior, reinforcing that fear could be managed and that proper communication could prevent escalation. Every gesture, word, and action was deliberate, aimed at fostering trust and reducing tension. The street, once filled with the tension of a potential crisis, now carried a sense of cautious relief. Pedestrians, some still recording the events, began to step back, resuming their routines while reflecting on the extraordinary occurrence. The flashing patrol lights, previously a symbol of immediate danger, now illuminated a scene of resolution and reflection. The director maintained focus on the officers, ensuring that the procedural steps were completed and that all parties understood the situation fully. Inside his mind, the director reflected on the broader implications of the morning's events. Misunderstandings and fear could create dangerous situations, even for experienced officers and officials. He considered how his approach, grounded in patience, clarity, and empathy, had guided the encounter toward a safe resolution. These reflections were not merely personal. They were lessons in leadership, communication, and the human element of law enforcement. The officers began to document the encounter, recording statements and noting procedural details. The director contributed as necessary, providing information and context to ensure that the records were accurate. The process was meticulous, emphasizing the importance of thorough documentation in maintaining accountability and transparency. Even in high-stress situations, the careful management of facts and information was essential. As the officers worked, the director continued to model calm professionalism. He understood that the first officer, despite his initial mistake, had acted out of fear and uncertainty. The director emphasized understanding over blame, focusing on lessons learned and the importance of reflection. He communicated that accountability and growth were part of every professional journey, particularly in law enforcement. The neighborhood, once captivated by the tense standoff, began to return to its morning rhythm. Cars moved steadily along the street, Pedestrians continued their routines and the sense of urgency dissipated. Yet the impact of the incident lingered in the minds of those who had witnessed it. The director, aware of this, remained composed, understanding that public perception and community trust were important aspects of every law enforcement interaction. The first officer, now more composed, spoke with his colleagues about what had occurred and how it could have been handled differently. The director observed, contributing insights without criticism, emphasizing shared responsibility and the importance of clear communication. His approach reinforced the value of patience, empathy, and professionalism in resolving conflicts and misunderstandings. The process of investigation and documentation continued. The officers reviewed their actions, noted discrepancies, and began considering potential consequences. The director, while fully cooperating, emphasized the importance of learning and reflection. He shared experiences from his own career, illustrating how understanding human behavior and emotions could prevent future incidents and improve law enforcement practices. Through the interaction, the director demonstrated that authority was not about dominance or control, but about guidance, clarity, and empathy. He provided a model for managing high-stress situations without escalating fear or conflict. His calm presence, steady voice, and deliberate actions created a safe environment for all involved, allowing the situation to transition from tension to resolution. As the minutes passed, the officers completed the necessary verification and documentation. The first officer, now fully aware of the mistake and its potential consequences, expressed relief and gratitude for the director's patience and guidance. The director remained composed, acknowledging the officer's feelings while emphasizing the importance of accountability and continued learning. The street, once a scene of high tension, gradually returned to normal. The residents resumed their activities, the traffic flowed, and the immediate stress dissipated. Yet the morning's events would be remembered, highlighting the fragility of human perception and the importance of patience and communication in law enforcement interactions. In reflection, the director considered the human aspects of policing. Fear, miscommunication, and uncertainty could create dangerous situations, but they could be mitigated through clear, empathetic, and patient action. His experience demonstrated that professionalism and human-centered approaches were essential in ensuring safety, maintaining trust, and resolving conflicts effectively. The final steps of the morning involved the officers reviewing the encounter internally. The director provided input where appropriate, ensuring that the documentation accurately reflected the situation. His approach reinforced the importance of reflection, learning, and accountability, emphasizing that even in difficult and unusual scenarios, a focus on humanity and professionalism could guide successful resolution. By the end of Part 4, the situation had transitioned from immediate danger to careful resolution. The officers had acknowledged the mistake, documented the encounter, and begun reflecting on how to prevent similar incidents. The director had guided the process with patience, clarity, and empathy, demonstrating the power of human-centered decision-making in law enforcement. The street, once tense and uncertain, now carried a sense of calm, reflection, and understanding, with lessons learned for everyone involved. By the time the FBI director prepared to leave the scene, the morning had evolved from a tense standoff into a moment of reflection and accountability. The officers had completed their verification, and the first officer, whose actions had sparked the incident, now understood the gravity of what had occurred. There was no longer a sense of immediate danger, only the weight of responsibility and the lessons that could be drawn from the event. The director, ever composed, recognized that even in unusual circumstances, clarity, patience, and empathy could guide a situation toward resolution. The officers began discussing the next steps with their supervisors, reporting the details of the encounter and the actions taken. The director observed, offering factual clarifications when necessary, ensuring the official record was accurate. He remained calm, understanding that the process of accountability was just as important as the immediate de-escalation. Every action taken now would influence how future encounters were managed, shaping policy, training, and awareness. The first officer, still visibly affected by the morning's events, expressed a mix of relief, embarrassment, and a desire to learn from the mistake. The director engaged with him in a professional yet empathetic manner, emphasizing that mistakes could happen to anyone, but accountability, reflection, and learning were what defined a responsible officer. He shared insights from his career, showing that experience and patience could guide even the most unexpected interactions towards safe outcomes. The neighborhood, which had witnessed the unfolding event, began to return to its ordinary rhythm. Cars moved steadily along the streets, pedestrians resumed their routines, and the tension in the air dissipated. Yet the memory of the incident lingered. Residents reflected on the unexpected drama they had observed, noting how quickly fear and misunderstanding could escalate even ordinary situations. The director, aware of the impact on both officers and bystanders, understood that perception and professionalism were intertwined in every law enforcement encounter. Back at the station, the incident was reviewed in detail. Supervisors evaluated the actions of the first officer, the procedures followed, and the outcome of the encounter. The officer was placed on administrative leave pending further investigation, a standard procedure to ensure accountability and safety. The director's role in the event was acknowledged, highlighting how calm, measured, and empathetic intervention could prevent escalation and promote understanding. The investigation revealed the factors that had contributed to the misunderstanding. The first officer had acted out of heightened fear and misjudgment, a combination of nervousness and uncertainty. The backup officer's presence had helped stabilize the situation, but the director's patience and clear communication had been pivotal in ensuring a safe resolution. This analysis became part of internal discussions about training, communication, and the human element in law enforcement. As the day progressed, media attention began to focus on the unusual event. Reports circulated, capturing the incident of a high-ranking FBI official being stopped and held at gunpoint by local law enforcement. The director, mindful of public perception, emphasized professionalism, accountability, and learning. He spoke about the importance of understanding human behavior, the dangers of assumptions, and the need for clear communication in every interaction. His perspective reinforced the message that safety, patience, and empathy were essential components of effective policing. Within the law enforcement community, the incident sparked discussions about training and procedures. Officers reflected on the importance of identifying individuals accurately, managing fear, and ensuring that assumptions did not lead to unnecessary escalation. The director's handling of the situation became a reference point for demonstrating how composure, patience, and human-centered thinking could prevent harm and resolve conflicts safely. The first officer, having faced the consequences of his actions, underwent additional training and counseling. The focus was on understanding human behavior under stress, managing fear, and improving communication skills. The director's interaction provided a practical example of how calm, clear, and empathetic action could turn a potentially dangerous encounter into a safe and instructive experience. It was a learning moment that emphasized growth and accountability over punishment alone. The director reflected on the broader lessons from the morning. Even with experience, authority, and knowledge, he had been momentarily vulnerable due to human error and fear. The incident underscored the importance of patience, clarity, and empathy in every encounter, particularly in law enforcement. Human reactions, perceptions, and emotions could shape outcomes just as much as procedure and authority. This reflection became part of his ongoing efforts to improve practices, training, and awareness in his professional sphere. The neighborhood, now quiet and returning to its regular routines, had witnessed an extraordinary example of professionalism, patience, and human-centered action. Residents who had observed the event expressed surprise at the level of composure maintained by the director, noting how a potentially dangerous situation had been resolved without harm. The lessons extended beyond law enforcement, illustrating how understanding, empathy, and clear communication could diffuse tension in any high-stakes scenario. As the day concluded, the FBI director returned to his office, resuming his work with a renewed perspective on human behavior, communication, and professional responsibility. The events of the morning were analyzed, discussed, and documented, serving as a case study for both internal and public audiences. The director emphasized the importance of continuous learning, reflection, and applying lessons from real-world experiences to improve procedures, policies, and interpersonal understanding. The incident, while unusual and initially frightening, became a story of resolution, learning, and accountability. The first officer faced consequences appropriate to the mistake, while the director's calm and measured approach ensured safety and clarity. The neighborhood had witnessed the fragility of assumptions and the power of human-centered action. The director's example highlighted that patience, empathy, and professionalism were essential, even in moments where authority alone might not suffice. Over time, the lessons from the encounter influenced training programs and internal discussions. Law enforcement officers were reminded of the importance of verification, communication, and emotional control. The director continued to advocate for approaches that emphasized humanity, patience, and clear communication. His experience demonstrated that even in high-pressure scenarios, maintaining composure and empathy could prevent harm, build trust, and promote learning. In conclusion, the events of that morning were a reminder of the unpredictable nature of human interactions, particularly in law enforcement. Fear, misunderstanding, and assumption could lead to dangerous situations, but clarity, patience, and empathy could guide resolution. The FBI director's experience became a model of professional conduct, showing that human-centered approaches, accountability, and reflection were as vital as procedure and authority. The officers, the neighborhood, and the broader law enforcement community all learned valuable lessons, making the incident a turning point in understanding the balance between human behavior and professional responsibility. The story closed with a sense of resolution, learning, and the ongoing commitment to safety, professionalism, and empathy in every encounter.